see if I can fix this a little bit. So when we last were together, we were talking about major persecution in the Roman Empire, and hopefully you all got this right on the quiz. But remind me, who was the leader of the most widespread persecution in Rome? Die something. Remember that part at least. It is Diocletian. And so he's the guy that, was that not on the quiz? No. Oh, I must have taken that one off. Yeah. You're waiting for that one? Yeah. I thought I put that on there, but I must have at the last minute taken that off, just concerned that maybe we didn't quite get to that point, or I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, but now you'll know it later on down the road. You'll know who Diocletian is. And now we get to the point where we're going to start to see some acceptance in the church, where we go from very widespread persecution, people not accepting Christ's message, to now all of a sudden there's a change in mindset. And it comes through Constantine. So, just as a sidebar here, an important part of learning history and understanding the events as we talk about them, there are so many things happening at the same time in the world that if we were to talk about them all chronologically, we would be jumping back and forth between Rome, between Asia, between Africa, between the New World, all over the place. Yes, that is part of the reason why we have so many history classes. But it's also, I'm not trying to confuse you here, but we've jumped ahead 300 years past the life of Christ, or almost 300 years, 313. So the Roman Empire spans several hundred years, and so when we talk about the Middle Ages, we are going to talk a little bit about some of this overlap coming a couple units down the road. And just to help us understand that Rome is continuing on here, there are other things happening in the world besides Rome, which we will come back. So there may be some things we talk about that happened in the 200s, some in the early 300s here that are happening at the same time, but we may not get to them right now. So Constantine decides in 313 that he's going to issue the Edict of Milan. And this document here makes Christianity legal. It makes it legal in the Roman Empire. So here's why. Constantine is one of the emperors of Rome. He is a military leader, and he is concerned about his men getting ready for battle. Well, one night he is laying in his bed. He's asleep on his emperor bed. And he has a vision. He has a dream. And in this dream, Emperor Constantine, laying on his little emperor bed, he looks up into the sky and he sees a shining cross up in the sky come out of the clouds. An image of the crucifixion. Now, I think it's also important for us to understand that we have glorified the image of the cross today, where it's a symbol of pride, it's a symbol of worship. Well, back in those days, it was a symbol of gruesomeness. It might be the worst thing. Yeah, in some places around the world it is. None of us would think of wearing a guillotine on our neck. None of us would think about putting a guillotine on our wall in our church building. That just doesn't make sense. Well, obviously we understand the context of why people use the cross. It's obviously a reference to Christ. But anyway, going back to his vision, he sees up in the sky, come out of the clouds, this shining cross. And he hears from that cross these words, "By this sign conquer." By this sign conquer. So, that's his dream. He wakes up and he goes, whoa, all right. By this sign conquer. By this sign. By the cross, I'm supposed to conquer. Well, I know that group of Christians, they identify with Christ who died on the cross. That's like their big thing. So, yeah, maybe we need to embrace the Christians a little bit here. Maybe we need to, maybe God is telling me that I need to become a Christian. And if I become a Christian, then we're going to conquer all kinds of people. Does that seem logical? Can you follow his thought process? You can see where he gets it from. Now, it doesn't mean that that's really the way he should have interpreted. I'm not asking you to identify that way. I'm just saying, can you follow his thought process? Does that make sense based off his dream? Sure. Yeah, I think so. And so Constantine, he goes to the local Christians and he says, hey, how do I become one of you? And they, in their, now, you have to understand that after the last almost 300 years, that there are a wide variety of Christian groups that have spread throughout Rome. We talk about the diaspora. And so there are some Christian groups that have strayed a little bit from the teachings of Christ. There are others that still maintain a very close alignment with what Christ taught. Well, so as he goes to this group, they said, well, all you got to do is to say a prayer. You need to become a member of the Christian church, and then you're a Christian. There you are. Lo and behold. Wonderful. So he issues the Edict of Milan, and he says, okay, I'm now a Christian, so no more persecution of Christians. Christians are safe in Rome. And all the Christians breathed a huge sigh of relief, and they said, yes, we're so thankful for that. No more persecution. And so Rome now becomes a haven for heretics. Well, I should say, but it protects from heretics. I should have said that differently. Protects from heretics. Now, this term heretic is one that you're going to hear a lot as we get into the Middle Ages. We talk about religion, we talk about Christianity, the Catholic Church. Heretic is somebody that teaches against the Word of God or teaches against what the church says. And right now is not the time for the church conversation. We will be having that later on. But a heretic is somebody that teaches against the Bible or the church. And so they get labeled a heretic. And so Rome is trying to keep heretics out of its empire. And one of those heretics was Arius. Now, Arius came up with his own set of beliefs that were a little bit different from the teachings of Christ. And what Arius said was that Christ was not the Son of God. And Arius said that Jesus was a prophet. He was a really good man. He had really good things to say, but Jesus was not the Son of God. He was not deity. Apparently, he did not read the book of John very well. But a lot of people believe that. Even today, a lot of people believe that Jesus was just a good man, that he's not the Son of God, and so therefore he should not be worshipped, and his death on the cross really meant nothing for our belief system. Well, that belief system is called Arianism. That's not going to show up on the slides, but you should include that in your notes. Arianism. So spelled A-R-I-A-N, ism. So you're taking Arius' name and you're substituting the last two letters of U.S. with A-N, and then adding an ism at the end. Yes, ma'am.
Back to the dream thing.
Yep.
Do you think like maybe God could have actually done that to give them freedom?
Perhaps. Yeah, I think that's a good point. We don't know. And for all we know, Constantine could have made this whole thing up. You know, we don't know. We're taking his word for it. We can't see his dreams. And we also don't know what happened there. We don't know why God sends certain dreams to us. Some dreams we don't want to share, we don't want to know about. And so we can't control those things. But Arius and his followers promote the idea of Arianism, which challenges the deity of Christ. And it says that Christ is not God. And that was obviously a problem for Christians because that was their whole belief system, is that Christ was the Son of God. And so it caused major controversy within the Roman Empire. And so the Romans, led by Constantine, said, well, we've got to figure this out. And so they have a council. And as we continue on, you'll find out that the people of Rome like to have councils. I have to imagine Starbucks must have been involved. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come to any kind of agreement. So they sit around the table at Starbucks and they decide they're trying to figure out, okay, who's right? Are the Christians right, or is Arianism correct? And they talk it out, they explore the theology, they look at the Bible, and they come out in the Council of Nicaea and they say that Arianism is wrong, that the Christians are right. And so they declare Arianism illegal. So if you believe, along with Arius and his viewpoint, that Jesus is not God, then you could be persecuted. And all the Christians say, yay, we're okay. Why can't they just live in peace?
Like, why not just be like, okay, whatever, why does that matter so much?
Somebody gotta kill somebody.
Rome just likes to kill. So
Wow.
you always have to sign over to them to kill someone.
And we have illustrated why. As soon as you brought that up, everybody has their own opinion. And we start talking and we start fighting and disagreeing. And that's what was going on in Rome.
No, then just be like, hey, nobody hurt anybody. How about that?
Well, here's
Why everybody gotta
here's-
die?
But the Bible's also for freedom.
but here's where we're going to go with this. Constantine's conversion, and I use the air quotes in case you're listening to this and not able to see me, his conversion to Christianity was all about how it was going to benefit Rome militarily and politically. It was not a personal decision for Christ, as far as we can tell, based off of his actions. So he did not want this to cause division among the people. He wanted a unified single religion. So we fast forward here. Are there countries in the world today that force people into a single religion? Yes, absolutely.
I believe so.
You're right. It doesn't mean that it works. What about America today? Do we have a single religion forced upon us by the government? No. Are we on that path?
Most
They'll
likely.
probably try.
In public schools, they force atheism on.
And atheism is what religion?
It's not religion, but
It's it's the worship of no God or the absence of God, and so therefore, even though they would claim I don't believe in religion, it is almost in and of itself its own religious viewpoint.
Yeah, but other religions do like
Yeah.
prayer or something, but the only religion they don't is Christianity.
Well, that depends. I want to be careful there because that depends on the location, the
Yeah.
school. Because yes, that may be true in some areas. Others, it may be blanket. Nobody can worship anything. Which to me, and this is me getting my own personal opinion in here. When you say nobody can worship anything, that means that you are catering to the atheists. So, how does that work in a nation that is a nation of religious freedom? Today, this is part of bringing ancient history into modern day that is important for us to examine. Part of the reason why we study this. So, the Council of Nicaea says that Arianism is illegal, and Christianity is upheld as the official religion of Rome. We get here to Theodosius the First, and he takes it a step further than Constantine. And we're going to hold off on Constantine for right now, and we will come back and we'll talk about him when we get to the Middle Ages a little bit more. So we will hear Constantine's name again. Well, kind of the early Middle Ages. Yeah, we will hear his name come back again, but for right now we're going to pause on him. So Theodosius takes it a step further than Constantine, and he actually makes Christianity the official religion of Rome. So we have come so far from Nero, who started persecuting Christians, now to Theodosius the First, and he says that's the only religion allowed in Rome, the Roman Empire. You have a problem with that?
Yes.
Why?
Because
You're not supposed to
Bible
force
is for like
It
It's
may
not
be
like
correct,
forcing
but it also
upon
says
people.
to not like Christ didn't force his views on anyone.
You're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Even
So-
though he was correct.
Hey,
Like just
everyone
because
should be able
Christianity is
to
correct doesn't mean you need to
have
shut
their
down
rights
people's
follow
feelings
what
and
they
say I'm gonna kill you.
follow, but
When
also
we're
they
gathering here.
Like
So-
that just makes it more like Islam.
Yeah,
So-
And that's angry.
to be honest.
Yeah. Well,
that makes me mad.
Julie?
So you said that if they didn't, like, it was illegal to follow
Mm-hmm.
What other religion then could they have if they didn't think that Jesus was?
Well, you still have Jews that would agree with Arius, that believe that Jesus was not the Son of God, and so you have Judaism. You also
Wouldn't Judaism be a form of Arianism?
Yeah.
right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So you
Judaism was technically illegal at this point.
correct. If you did not believe in Christianity, then Judaism would not have been accepted either. You also have worship of pagan gods.
And that was
So you've got all kinds of influence from the Greek culture that was still there in Rome. If you believed in Zeus or you believed in any of these other gods, you were going against the law. Okay, so
But if the Christians weren't the Christians were in their spot
mhm.
no
one
wonder
point,
people think it was
so then they just like let it go, like
I'm
they let
sorry.
people go through the same stuff they did.
So you're saying the Christians allowed the persecution; they were okay with it. Is that what you're questioning? Well,
Like, would you
Like,
be
did
okay
they
with
at
it
least
if
try
that
to
happened?
okay. So here's something that's also important for us to understand is that there were a lot of people that were simply bystanders. They didn't endorse or embrace or accept what the Roman government said regarding a religion, or when they had persecution, and sometimes they didn't even, were not even aware that stuff was going on. It's kind of like some of the Germans in World War II. There were a lot of Germans that had no idea that they were killing Jews until after the war was over. Now, as far as well,
Okay, they didn't think that they
But-
were like concentration camps though.
but what we need to look at here, we just need to see that. So for the Christians, they didn't necessarily look at it from the perspective we do. They looked at it as, hey, now we're free to worship how we want to. And I'm sure there were some that were saying, well, we shouldn't persecute other people. We should love them. We should share the gospel with them. But we are going to begin talking here about some of the changes that are happening in the church while this is going on. So what we know and think of as the church today does not necessarily have the same belief system as the churches back then. There was a period of growth and a period of confusion within the church after the apostles were all killed. And there were a lot of churches that they had to hide underground, and they were led by people that were trying to figure things out. So some of the churches were doing really well. Other churches were not doing so great. And so some of the changes that we see in the church is that the government freedom that they are given when Christianity is made legal and is made the official religion, those freedoms actually give people too much freedom to where they become content, complacent, and they stop reading the Word of God. And so because of that, they stop learning and understanding what it says. And I am still talking about Rome, not the United States, just in case there's any confusion on that. You all got it. All right. But here's where we're at. And again, I know that I'm kind of hitting on some things close to home, but how many times do we sit in church and we just ignore what's being said? Or how many times do we allow our Bible to sit on the shelf or our app to remain unopened? Because let's be real, we're mostly reading it out of an app today. How many days do we go without opening up that Bible app? And we can be guilty of the same thing that they were, where they were allowing themselves to be so comfortable in their religious view that they were no longer growing in their faith. And so when the Roman government came along and said, hey, here's what we're doing, they said, oh, okay, sure. As long as you leave me alone, let my beliefs alone and let me do what I want to do, then I'm fine. And they were declining in their walk with Christ. And so there's a lot of people who join the church because it's a popular thing to do. And again, I'm still talking about Rome. I'm not talking about the United States right now. But we still see that same trend happening here, where people join the church because it's the popular thing to do, or that church has the nicest coffee selection, or that church has the best music, or that church has you name it, the greatest youth activity. So I'm going to join that church because it's a popular thing to do, not because of a relationship with Christ. And that's why we have so many Christians in this era who are failing to acknowledge the truth and failing to uphold the truth and allowing things to happen in their government without taking a stand. And so there are a few additional things that are happening where a lot of the members are enjoying prosperity. Life is good. Rome is good. Life is comfortable. And so they just coast through their Christian life. Again, to be very careful about where we are even today. There are a number of pagan ideas that begin to influence the New Testament church during the Roman era. So one of those pagan ideas was the idea of monasticism. So most of us are familiar with monks, and we have in our mind a photo similar to what you see here. This guy wearing the hood, he lives in a monastery, and he's apart from the rest of the world. This was a pagan idea that was brought in by other religious groups that now all of a sudden we have New Testament church believers thinking, well, that sounds like a good idea. We should separate ourselves from the world so that we're not corrupted by the world. Well, that's not how Christ called us to live. Yes, we should not allow ourselves to be corrupted by the world, but we are to live in the world without becoming a part of it, according to 1 John. So here they got the wrong idea. They also began to develop a hierarchical structure. Now what that means is that they're going to have one single person as the head of the church. Below him, you're going to have 2 or 3 people helping him to lead the church. Below them, you're going to have 2 or 3 more people, and it looks like a pyramid of leadership, all pointing up to one person. And I know some of you are thinking, well, that sounds like the Pope. Yes, and that's how the Pope structure developed, was during this time where Christians started embracing other ideas that are not necessarily aligning with the way Christ has set up the New Testament church. And I realize that New Testament does talk about bishops. It does talk about church leadership, but it also talks about the churches being independent of one another. And, well, we'll get into that more when we talk about the Roman Catholic Church later on. Yes, ma'am.
When did the whole, the Catholic Bible is different than our Bible because of the different parts in it that they added to it. They talk about,
Mm-hmm.
I'm drawing a blank on the word. Starts with the, before you go to burn off your sins.
Oh, purgatory.
That.
Yep.
When did that happen?
When does that develop? I don't have a good answer for you on that because I don't know when they actually put that all together. But I do know that they have some pretty solid arguments for why they include some of the writings in there that are not part of the King James or New American Standard or ESV or whatever your church uses. But a lot of the writings come from what we call the Apocrypha, or they come from the writings of Josephus. And I mentioned Josephus earlier. The Apocrypha are writings that came between the Testaments that those who hold to the 66 books of, let's just use a King James Version Bible for right now, they will say that the Apocrypha are good historical writings, but we can't confirm that they were inspired by God. And so people much smarter than I have done a lot of digging into that and have found out that according to what they can determine, they're good for information, but not necessarily part of the canon of Scripture. So as far as when they put that all together, I don't have that answer for you. That's a good question. It's somewhere here during this point up through in the next couple hundred years, because by the time we get to the Middle Ages and we start talking through some of the advancement in culture there, they have all that set in scriptures. Yeah. So all these things help to contribute to the development of what we know today as the Roman Catholic Church. And moving forward, it's also important to know that the modern day Roman Catholic Church does not necessarily agree with or would uphold the same things when we mention the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. Now, some might, but they've gone through a number of revisions and changes, councils, they love councils, and they have changed their belief system, or they've come back and said, well, no, that was not really right, we shouldn't have done that, here's what we should have done. So if any of you currently attend a Catholic church or have attended one or family attends one, please understand that as we talk through that, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they believe. It'd be better for you to ask them, hey, what does your church believe? and why. And so it's usually interesting. We talk through that because I have people that have attended or do attend Catholic Church and offer some good discussion. And there's a lot of variety within current day Catholic churches as well. Yeah. Question?
Is like with the monasticism, is that one the nuns?
Eventually, it will bring in the nuns. Will be part of that. Not yet. Early on, it's just men, but that will come. Women, because they want to be as committed as men, and so they have their own convent that they will employ monastics. I don't know. Not sure why. Julie?
When Paul was like writing to the churches, were the churches, they weren't like they weren't like Pope type of,
No,
right?
no, because
Okay.
Paul would have still been in the first century. So we're about 200 years past Paul right now. And those early churches, he was writing to them because he started to see some of the pagan ideas begin to influence them, or he started to see division in the church, and so that's why he chose to write to them.
So that was kind of when we like legalized Christianity, that kind of affected all of that. Like
So
they began starting to do.
yeah, so they would have strayed away from what Paul had encouraged them to do, and they would have begun to embrace some of the ideas of the pagan culture. And they would have been 1 or 2 generations past Paul. Now, not all those churches would have jumped into this, and I think it's also important to remember that some of the churches in Rome maintained their independence and did not fall into some of the traps that we've talked about. And that's part of what preserves our current view of what the New Testament church looks like, is because they have maintained faithful to their beliefs. So let's break Rome apart here. Let's talk about how they fall and some of the reasons for decline. And I'm going to run through these rather quickly. You can read through the slides as well later on. But probably the biggest reason was their instability as far as their leadership. They were very inefficient and unstable in the way that they governed and the way they ran their nation. They had some economic problems where they were short on money. Their army was too expensive to maintain, and they did not have enough, they were not bringing in enough finances. They also began to tax the people far too much, and the people became discontent with that. And their money began to lose value, and so was that a picture that I had on that slide previously? Yeah.
I can't get it all.
If you, oh, that's strange. Sorry about that. Well, you can write something down in the presenter notes, I guess. So as their money declined in value, people began throwing away their money, and instead of using money, they went back to a barter system where they exchanged goods for goods. And you remember Jesus talked about the coins, and he talked about the money rendered therefore to Caesar, the things that are Caesar, and things to God, things that are God's. So money was a huge part of the Roman Empire. Well, now it's become so valueless that they just start chucking it away, and they start trading cows and chickens again, except they didn't really have cows. So, yeah, they didn't. Roman Empire didn't have a lot of cows there. No, just regional thing wasn't typically there. Yeah.
So cows.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So by like not, sorry for asking,
that's fine.
but for by trading and stuff, was that kind of like a rebellion? Or
No.
did it not affect?
No, it wasn't rebellion. It was simply the fact that their money wasn't worth anything anymore. That's what the economic decline's all about, is that money's not worth anything. Inflation was a big part of it, yeah. So it'd be like if I pulled out my wallet and
But then it
hey, actually, you have a $10 bill in here.
But have it,
Which question?
it wouldn't really help the government or whatever if they were just trading.
Why did they?
Right,
Why did
right.
they charge so much?
Okay, so part of the reason that that their money fell in value was because all it was it was a piece of paper. Well, they didn't use paper; they used metal, And the only reason it was valuable is because the government says it was. It's kind of like this right here. Only reason this is valuable is because our government's name is on it, and they say this is worth $10. But let's just say, for example, that our government collapsed today. And so if our government collapses, this no longer has any value. It now becomes just a piece of paper. And so if I go to you and I say, hey, I would like 2 venti frappuccinos, please, and you're going to look at me and you're going to say, that's just a sheet of paper. Do you have anything else? And I say, well, no, I've got this sheet of paper and that one. Oh, I better be careful with that one. Will you take this one? Well, no, that's not worth anything. What do you have that's worth something? Well, I have a computer. Let's see, I've got a computer, I've got a smartphone. Can I trade you one of those for the frappuccinos? And then you'd say, yeah, I could use that.
That's a terrible trade.
I know it is.
Frappuccino.
But that's kind of what happens is people then have to find something of value to trade with one another because the money is no longer valuable. So that's a little more economics than you probably bargained for today. Morally, the empire was falling apart. Instead of being content, their country now became focused on greed, divorce, immorality, superstition, all kinds of things that you might even... What?
Is that when the witch trials?
No. We are way too early for that. Yeah. That is United States.
Same
Yeah.
witch trials. They were witch trials in
Yeah.
France first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're still way too early for that. Okay. Now, so here we have Diocletian, and so as we talk about him a little bit, yes, he did have the most widespread persecution of Christians. He had a co-emperor that they called an Augustus, which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there. I'm not... I'm trying to figure out here what's the most critical things that we know here. Diocletian begins the dividing process for splitting up the Roman Empire. Not intentionally, but he believed that the empire was too big for one man to handle, that he couldn't do the job. So he said, I want to create a co-emperor. I want to have somebody else helping me out. And so he divided the kingdom into 2. And so when he divided the kingdom into 2, he led one half, the co-emperor led the other half, and then beneath them, they each appointed leaders to help them govern because there were so many people and so much land for them to try to maintain. And so he divides that empire into 4 different sections in order to help deal with the financial problems. They set maximum price limits to help stop inflation. So I'm not too concerned here that you know all this stuff in here. If you remember, Diocletian divided the empire into 2 sections. He has a co-emperor called an Augustus. That's like the key critical piece of information there. Well, so he divided into 2 first, and then they appointed a Caesar below them, which subdivided, which eventually, yes, turned it into 4 sections. But he started off dividing into 2. He and the co-emperor had 2 sections, then they divided into 4. Yeah. So then we come back here and we need to talk about Constantine once again. Besides his role with the Christians, he moves the capital city to Byzantium. I did not sneeze. That is the name of a city. Okay, so we have Rome, which is in this region of the world right here. He starts to see that the empire was declining. People were getting upset and that there was just not enough money here. Where was the money when it came to trade with other parts of the world? In the East. So he decides...
Okay.
Well, but we're struggling for finances in Rome. So we have to figure out where can we make some money. The money is over in the Far East. So he moves the Roman Empire, or the capital of the empire, from here over here to Byzantium. That way, all they have to do is they have to cross, I believe it's the Black Sea. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they just have to cross this short area, and now they can get better goods, easier goods, and they can maintain the empire. So he moves the capital city. Capital city changes its name from Byzantium to New Rome. And then later on, it also takes on the name of the man who moved the capital city, Constantinople, after Constantine. Yeah, so you may have heard of Constantinople. If you haven't, now you have. Shortly after he moves the capital city out of Rome, the western half of the empire falls apart. They fall into what we would classify today as a depression, and it begins the start of the Dark Ages. That's the plague, which happens during that time, yeah. But the Dark Ages, we'll come back, we'll keep talking about another day. So the western half of Rome falls, eastern Rome survives, and they concentrate all of their military, their resources, everything on the eastern side over here in the new capital city, and Constantine continues to reign with moderate success over there. But the empire essentially loses half of its power almost overnight.
Why? What did they do to
Well, remember that a lot of the power of the Roman government came from the people. When the people lost faith in the government, they no longer supported it, and Rome no longer had the money to be able to force people into submission. They didn't have the army big enough and strong enough to be able to tell people, you do it our way or you die. So the empire just become too big, and all of a sudden now they had to regroup over in a new capital city, and it's like the balloon just kept getting bigger and bigger, and then it popped, and now they're trying to rescue whatever they can of it. Chance?
Wouldn't you like want to go to like the farther city because you could charge them like double that amount or something because it's lower, like more demand and less supply over there?
Are you talking about Constantinople or are you talking about Old Rome?
The old road, yeah.
So this was the main trade route right here.
Right, but everyone was going there.
Right.
So couldn't you just take like that extra time to go and then go and like charge like even more over there?
So
Farther over?
you could have, but the people over here were not going to be able to afford it. Remember, they've kind of lost all of their money. So yes, if you want to trade like for chickens or something, maybe. But these people are declining in serious economic troubles. You're not going to make as much money. If you are bringing a shipload of stuff from Asia, you want to go here because you're going to get more money for it. Okay? So it's kind of like if you're selling a car or you're selling your computer or something, you want to sell it wherever you can get the most money. And that's why people went to Constantinople. Joel? Yeah. Last couple things here today. We've got some invaders that you need to identify with. We have the term barbarians. This is a general term. This is not pointing to any specific group of people. Barbarian is anybody who is not Roman.
I've never heard of the barbarian.
Well, now you have. Okay.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Okay. The Huns, like a
Yeah.
the Huns.
Yep. So the Huns.
They were so awful. I
Yeah.
love them.
So yes, I have watched Mulan as well. Watched it with
Love
Oh, Mr. Jones, you don't
Yep.
watch with people, you watch it by yourself.
Well, yeah. Late at night, I'm
Late at night on Netflix.
binge watching Disney girl flicks.
City girl flicks.
My daughter loves the line at the end. She like the old lady when I forget his name, but like the hero guy comes back to Mulan, and the lady says, oh, what's the line? Something about you can stay forever.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Um,
the granny.
Yeah, she said you can stay forever. After we watched Mulan, Avery went around the house just quoting that, like, oh, that was funny. You can stay forever. And she just thought that was the greatest line ever. Moving on, talking about the Huns. So the Huns were a fierce tribe from the Far East. And Mulan really does do a pretty good job of picturing what the Huns were like. They were vicious. They were ruthless.
Were they like that good at tracking though? Like the one guy, he
They,
spilled the doll, and he could tell like
yeah.
what town it was from.
Now maybe not quite that good, but they were really, really good. Now
Weren't they like basically like courting minus the horses?
they were what?
Like with I forget the first part of it.
They took your resources,
No,
burned
like
your town, killed your people.
there's like
Yes, they do.
can quarter people,
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't they do that?
Yeah, they did.
What is quarter people?
So
We'll come back to that later. All right, we'll come back to that later. So the Huns, they are attacking all over the eastern part of Rome, and so it causes other groups to seek refuge in Rome. So that's why the barbarians and some of the other groups, they come in to Rome to seek refuge there. And then we also have the Visigoths. The Huns are from the Far East. Mongolia, China, they would have come from there, and they would have been trying to attack into Rome. The Visigoths were people who came for refuge into Rome. They were being attacked by the Huns. And when they came into Rome, they were expecting to be protected. They were hoping to work well together with the Romans, but the Romans did not treat them very nice. The Romans bullied them. They picked on them. They did not like them. So they rebelled, and they killed the emperor at Adrianople. And they launched their own internal rebellion inside of the Roman Empire.
People who aren't even
Oh,
Romans.
for some reason I thought she was
How ironic.
So most of this right here is pretty self-explanatory when you look at the slides on Canvas, but let me hit a couple highlights for you, just so that way you can ask questions if you have any. We have the actual fall of Rome happens as a result of several different outsiders' attacks, and I listed a few of them here. We have the Visigoths. They are led by a man named Alaric. He's the guy looking very
Hilarious.
Alaric. Yeah, he's the guy here. He's got I think it's a leopard skin over his shoulder, looking very stately, very powerful. The Franks move into Gaul. Well, Gaul is modern-day France. This is why we call it France, is because the Frankish people went there. And they fled when Alaric was attacking. We have the Angles and the Saxons. They go to Britain. That's why, again, later on down in history, we know the British as Anglo-Saxon.
I've never heard them called that.
Well, now you have.
Wait, what is it?
British are called Anglo-Saxon
Why?
because of the fact that the Angles and the Saxons, they fled out of Rome and found refuge in Britain.
I'm an equal.
So many of us that have our heritage that goes back to England could trace even further back, perhaps here to Rome. And so we have the Huns led by Attila. Yep, Attila the Hun. His soldiers were known as the Scourge of God, not because that they thought so much of themselves. It was more of the people that were being attacked believed that it was God's wrath and judgment and perhaps the end of the world when Attila and his army came in, because they were so vicious, so brutal, and they were known for some pretty gruesome techniques that, well, quartering, yes, but yeah, quartering was relatively nice, I suppose. I mean, it was not uncommon for them to skin you and behead you and then take your head, put it on a pole, and march around with your head. That was pretty common.
Well, that'd be nice. You
It's
get to
like
see the world.
Chance?
Okay, just like kind of topic, but kind of off topic.
Okay.
Okay, was like the whole Roman army like the 300?
No.
Or like, okay.
No.
So that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, it gives you a glimpse of it, but not necessarily, yeah.
Okay.
We have the Vandals. The Vandals come in to try to conquer Rome. They came from Africa, and their name means destroyer of property. It's where we get our term vandalism today. It actually has a root here in the attack of Rome. Because there was a group of people called the Vandals, and they came in, they totally ransacked and destroyed a lot of property in Rome.
I just been there like tin cans, y'all.
And then we get to 476. This is a date that you should remember and you should know. I don't have very many dates, but this is one I want you to highlight. We already talked about 70 AD was the attack on Jerusalem and the spread of the Jews. 476 is the fall of Rome, where Rome loses its own control, and now the invaders have successfully conquered Rome. Rome no longer is independent.
So did they?
Julie? Yeah.
Did they just fall into like whichever invader went into whichever area? Like
Correct.
The area divided into
Yep. So each invader kind of took their own claim on part of Rome. Yep, exactly right.
Did they then fall because they were attacked